but a subject line that says quick question. And then the first line of the email will be, I know you're busy, but those
Yeah.
two things send all of the wrong signals. Can definitely go the other way with it as well, right? People try and be too cute. It ends up just being like verging on creepy. Imagine you're opening your bedroom window and you're shouting your sales message to someone who's walking by. How would you get their attention? How would you generate enough intrigue and curiosity that that person walking past on the street is happy to come in for a cup of tea and talk about it a bit further? If you're putting quick question in your subject line, stop. For the love of God, stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sales Cadence podcast. My name is Matt Sykes. I'm your host, and joining me on the podcast today is Jamie Woodbridge from the Inbox Club. Jamie is an outstanding email marketeer. His whole life is predicated on creating engaging words online so that people want to have a conversation in return. And that's such a hard thing to do these days. I don't know if you noticed, but it's getting a lot harder, not just in email marketing, but in every form of engagement. We are so conditioned now to just know what's coming next, and seeing an email pop into our inbox, and just by looking at the title, we can almost discount it. That's the world that Jamie operates in. You can imagine that's quite a challenging place to be. But fortunately, there are people like him around that know how to do it properly. And that's what you're going to hear over the next 60 minutes. It's quite a long podcast, this one. There's loads of really juicy content in there. We're going to talk about how you show up online and be different. That in itself is a challenging prospect to think about when you think about it, because there are so many people vying for your time in your inbox. How do you look different to everybody else to give yourself half a chance of starting that conversation? We talk a lot about ways of nurturing that conversation. So, a word that's often bandied about these days is giving value. So we explore what giving value is, and Jamie gives some really good insights and some advice on how you can create more value in a way that doesn't look like you're just trying to buy somebody's time. And then the really fascinating conversation around how do you just be yourself when you send an email? And there's a real art to be able to effectively stop being that imposter, trying to be somebody that you're not, or trying to give a message that you don't need to give, and just be yourself. And so what Jamie does brilliantly over the next hour is brings all of that information together. But super conversation. Love spending time in Jamie's company. Guy knows what he's doing. Why are we even having this conversation? Let's just get straight into it, shall we? Jamie Woodbridge, welcome to the Sales Cadence podcast.
Matt, thank you. It's great to be here. I'm an admirer of this podcast, so it's good to finally get on and be a guest.
Oh, I do like admirers.
Yeah.
Jamie, and what I really like is the conversation that we're going to have today, which is a really, I guess it's something that I've always kind of taken an interest in, but to be perfectly honest with you, I've kind of struggled, which is how you engage people through the power of outbound online engagement, whether that's emails or things like newsletters. So I'm really looking forward to the next, 45, 50 minutes, something like that. Jamie, before we start and we get into that really juicy content, just give the listener 60 seconds background into a little bit about yourself today and what you do today in your company, the Inbox Club, please.
Sure thing. 60 seconds will be a challenge, but let's do it. So, yes, I'm the co-founder of the Inbox Club. We're an email marketing agency, and that was born mostly through a passion of using great communication with an email. What we got bored of seeing was these boring campaigns, people being not very confident in the way they write from a sales front, and basically not using email to communicate, which is what it's supposed to. It's what it's designed for, right? So that's we got tired of seeing that and decided that we wanted to do something about it. So we started this agency, for better or for worse, and here we are. We get to do what we love day in, day out, which is copywriting in the form of email marketing.
Love it. And you say we, so there's somebody else in the business?
There is, yeah. It wasn't a royal we. So yeah, so I have a co-founder whose name is James. Some people find that confusing, Jamie and James, but we roll with it. It works. So yes, the two of us, we're both copywriters. So getting the opportunity to write not just for our own business but also for other people's businesses is a real privilege.
I think I'd quite like to do as well, just as well, is to sort of set the scene in terms of how you found yourself in this place. So we'll talk a little bit in a minute about your background and the last XD years of what you've been up to, what's effectively brought you to this place that you're in the Inbox Club. But before I go there, do you remember what you were doing when you made your first sale?
Do you know what? It depends on what you mean by my first sale, because I grew up with two brothers, and negotiating and being persuasive was something I had to learn from an early age. So,
Yeah.
uh, getting my brothers to act in a way that I wanted them to perhaps was my first sale. But in real terms, I was probably, as most people will find themselves, at a desk making my first sale, and it felt good, taking an order and then processing the order. And I was in a business where you would print the delivery note out and you go pack it and send it out yourself. So for
Oh,
me,
right.
seeing it in tangible terms, this taking the order from someone on the phone and then going and sending it out, and that was a very satisfying process.
Well, do you remember how old you'd have been, Jamie?
I would have been probably 19.
Okay, so this is like you've left uni or secondary education, whatever it might have been, and you found yourself actually in one of those rare things called a proper job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think, yeah, earning money, coming straight out. In fact, I didn't go to university, but I did get my degree later on through a work-based degree. But anyway, it's yeah, in a proper job, earning some good money, and I guess something that you hear quite a lot, Matt, is I fell into sales,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um, but it was something that I just fell in love with,
And so, how did you?
and
Let's just go there, Jamie. How did you fall into sales then?
so I fell into sales because I messed up. Basically, I think I left. I dropped out of school, and I was working at the co-op at the time, just as a as a store person, and all of my mates went off to uni, and I remember sitting there thinking, "Bloody hell, I've really messed up here." And I then got a job in a warehouse, picking and packing boxes, and I saw the sales team for that company and the work that they were doing, and I thought, God, I want to be a part of that. And so I had to do my own sales job there in convincing the MD that I could be part of that sales team, that I could do a job in sales, even though I was just working in the warehouse at the time, operating forklifts and packing boxes. So
Yeah,
for me, that was like a moment when I got to sit at that desk and make that first sale. For me, was that had backstory to it. I had to graft. I did a job share, and when I was able to then sit and take that sales job and then make that first sale, take that order,
yeah.
for me that was an achievement. And I think I had a chip on my shoulder because I didn't go to uni, and I wanted to prove that I could do something real. And
So, Jamie, let's just go back. Stay in sort of the world of education. I don't know. You must have been 15, I guess, maybe 16. You're sitting in a careers advice lesson, final year at high school, and you're asked the question, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Do you remember that conversation? And if so, do you remember what you wanted to be when you were younger?
problem that I had was that I didn't know, and I didn't necessarily have a strong hand guiding me towards any particular direction. So I remember being wanting to be a police officer for a
Okay,
long time.
right.
I interviewed and went through the hiring process, got to the final stage, and then decided to drop out because I wanted to continue working in sales. Which, for me, it was like, okay, well, there's confirmation here that sales is what I want to do, because here's this thing that I had dreamt of doing for a long time, but have ended up turning down, even though you got to the final stage and everything was looking good. So for
So you
me,
wanted to be a copper when you were younger, then?
yeah, believe it or not, and I don't know if that just came from TV shows, probably, but I think I always had a strong sense of kind of justice, and I think I wanted to be able to do that. And arguably, policemen maybe or police officers do or don't do that. I don't know, but I think that's what I wanted. I wanted to be on the side of good, but I then chose the opposite side and went into sales.
Well, the side of darkness. Got it.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's talk about this then, because
Yeah.
email marketing, that whole thing, it's getting a lot harder these days, isn't it? To have some kind of push through, some kind of engagement. What is it about What is it about trying to engage with people online? Because that's essentially the world that you live in, right? What is it about that at the moment is getting harder and harder?
Yeah, I think it is harder to do that, and I think it's what it's pushing people to do is to be more creative.
Mm,
And if you then make that step and you're more creative and you put more focus on researching, relationship building, offering value, actually it's much easier to stand out because of the amount of rubbish that's there. So, it's I would say maybe it is harder to break through, but if you're if you continue to do it in a bad way, it will be hard. If you're more creative, like I said, I think you have the opportunity here to stand out amongst the noise, right?
brilliant. And you very kindly have just prepped some two or three things just to talk to the listener about and share some advice and information. We'll get to those in a second. But before we do, I think my inbox and your inbox will be peppered full of mistakes, emails that have come to you, and you just thought to yourself, "Well, you just made a huge mistake there." Do any mistakes sort of come to mind when you start to look at the way people try and do this kind of online email marketing thing?
Yeah, there are, and this isn't a new insight because it's something that a lot of people will feel strongly about. But a subject line that says "quick question," I hate it. I really hate it. And then the first line of the email will be, "I know you're busy," but for me, those
Yeah,
two things send all of the wrong signals. It's weak. It's apologetic. It's not confident. It's in all the ways that it could be wrong. It is. I think so. For me, they're the two standout things, and I will share a bit later on. Ways in which you can approach it much differently.
yeah, brilliant. It is. Back to my point a second ago, it just gets harder and harder because the more people are trying to change and do things differently and be more engaging, and sometimes things work, but then of course they work for a while. People get used to them, and then it's like old news. You've got to find something new. So there's a constant hill that you're trying to climb to be engaging. So
Yeah,
look,
and
let's yeah.
so it's yeah. I mean, you can definitely go the other way with it as well, right? People try and be too cute with their outreach, and it ends up just being like verging on creepy. So there are ways of being creative without taking it too far. And actually, the people that are sending a lot of these emails that start with quick question and are sending emails that are bad end up being from lead gen agencies. So instantly it's like, well, you're sending me awful outreach here, and why would we trust you? You need to demonstrate to me how good your outreach is in terms of generating leads, and that's the first signal you get is the email. So yeah, there's a lot of people doing it awfully, and I am definitely one of those people. Before, in my early sales career, I made some huge mistakes. I did some horrible things in terms of copywriting and email outreach. So it's a learning process.
So let's just tee up the episode because you've prepared in advance three things. What are the three things that you'd like to share and talk about?
One I touched on already, which is standing out by being different,
Okay.
kind of be frame breaking, and that can take many forms, right? In trying to be clever.
Okay, that was number one. What's number
That's
two?
number one. Number two is to offer value. So few people do in their email outreach, so I'll talk a little bit about that shortly.
Brilliant.
And number three is to talk to people in your emails because so few people do that. Marketers, salespeople forget that email is a form of communication and that you should be
Mm,
talking to people in your outreach. So
terrific.
again, I'll go into that a bit more detail.
Love it, Jamie. Let's go to number one then. So standing out by being different. So in my, I'm just literally looking at my phone and I'm looking at my all the emails that drop in, and there's very few that prick my attention, but there's lots of I want to use that word. You said they're creepy.
Yeah,
Lots of creepy 6x your leads with this tool. How do you? First of all, why do we need to be different? I know it's an obvious question, but let's go back to basics. Why do you need to be different?
you need to be different because you need to capture attention, right? And that's why you know subject lines like quick question, because capturing attention usually comes down firstly to the subject line. That's the first instance you have of, or the
Yeah,
first opportunity you have to grab attention. So you know subject lines like quick question or 6x your leads, we've heard those a million times before, uh, and it's no
So
different
therefore,
to
you're not being different at all, are you? You're just doing the
no.
same thing that everybody else has done, right?
No, and 6xing your leads doesn't necessarily sound like a bad thing. I'd like that, but it just doesn't sound believable anymore because you've heard it a million times before. So, being different, and you see, good marketers and good salespeople do this a lot in all instances of copywriting, right? Those you see remember some of those ads that stick out in memory. They're usually frame breaking. They're jarring. They kind of
Mm,
break you out of that routine. You know, Especially nowadays when attention is being pulled by so many different areas. I might sit in the living room with my wife, and we might have three or four screens on, at the same time, and
yeah,
the poor dog's just sat there, trying to get some attention. So it's you need to snap people out of that a little bit, and finding ways of being different is one way you can do that.
yeah, fascinating. In fact, just on that point, you mentioned there the title because that's the first thing that we see when an email lands in our inbox.
Yeah,
There's some component pieces that make up an email, aren't there? So, and title is the first one. So it all starts, doesn't it, with I've got literally 2 seconds to capture someone's attention, maybe even less. The title
yeah,
is key. Is it pertinent to ask what would an example of being different in a title be?
yeah, for sure. I think firstly, grabbing attention is one thing. Generating curiosity, generating intrigue is another, right? So it's grabbing attention and generating intrigue and curiosity that will then lead them to opening the email. So you need to balance those two parts. And I think everything we do, we test to find out what truly works. But
Right.
sometimes something really simple. So we had an email come in the other day from someone. I can't remember if it was my inbox or my colleagues, but the subject line just said "lover," full stop. You know, in a lot of ways, that's a bad subject line in a traditional sense. But in other ways, it stood out in the inbox. I had no idea what it was about. And we clicked it. So thinking about being frame breaking sometimes is how can I stand out and generate some intrigue here? I don't need to give the full story, and I need to be a little bit different to what is usually in their inbox. Um,
What, just
so
out of curiosity, what was the email about?
the email was about it was a lead gen agency
Okay.
looking to bring on clients. So that they were being a bit more kind of clever in the way that they got people to open emails.
But it
Um,
worked, right? You clicked.
yeah, we opened it. What didn't
Yeah.
work was the body of the email because
Yeah.
we clicked straight out of it as soon as we knew. And lead gen agencies have a tough time of it, but they should be good at it, right? So
Yeah.
it was an instant turn off when I opened it, but we opened the email. So
Fantastic. And so I was listening to a podcast a couple of days ago, Jamie, and it was a similar theme to the conversation we're having right now. It was, I think she was an SDR based over in the States, and her opinion on titles was because we are so conditioned now to, oh, I know that's going to be a spam or that's going to be a sales email. She actually now makes it as dull and as boring as possible to almost create that sort of it's a pattern interrupt that says, well, this can't possibly be a sales email because it says, the agenda, or it says I couldn't think of any examples off the top of my head, but I'm just
yeah,
wondering whether or not, almost going full circle back to the most dullest title ever gets you the best chance of opening it.
yeah, absolutely. I think if you got an email from your nan, it wouldn't say "quick question" in the subject line, would it? It would say something really boring. It wouldn't say,
Yeah.
it would have something boring. It would have something run of the mill. So I can definitely see that argument for sure.
Yeah.
And if we think about ways in which we send emails to people, maybe in the work environment, if you want to send an email to a high someone who's higher up in the hierarchy, someone who's got very little time, someone, but you need to get their attention to get something signed off. The way you'd write that subject line would be very different than if you were doing the cold outreach. So it's how do we use what we know is good practice when it comes to grabbing someone's attention, because we seem to forget about that. We seem to forget how to do it when we then write cold outreach. We try to be too clever.
I,
So I can definitely see that argument for sure.
I guess the real challenge in all of this is that you might write some fantastic content, some really engaging content, but if you can't get them to open it, they won't see it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that, I would say a large part of getting people to open your emails is down to the subject line and preview text, which is that small snippet of information you get below the subject line when you look at the inbox as a whole.
Yeah.
The other part that contributes to getting opened is the reputation you have for the kind of content you send. So that happens over time, and you need to build the trust and the relationship and the reputation for providing good value in the content of your email, because then that will contribute to how many times your email is opened for, down the line. So
So
content.
we're moving into point number two here, aren't we? About which is offering value. So
Yeah.
the email's been opened. Now we've got to go and do something in the content to continue to be different, but now start to, because this is, I guess that I see this quite a lot. I think it's changing as well. So I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but I think
Mm.
people have worked out now that if I'm going to go and reach out to somebody for the first time through some kind of cold online engagement, be that an email campaign or a newsletter, I actually have to put them front and center. It has to be about them. It has to be of benefit to them, right? And it can't be me asking for something, because that's just not going to work, right?
Yeah, for sure. You and I have both been through, I'm sure, numerous amounts of sales workshops, training, weekends away, all of that stuff. Listening to people and making the conversation about them is kind of one of the main tools that a salesperson should have. One of
It's
the main
standard,
skills.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
yeah,
And
fundamental.
it's when you're crafting this cold email again, you want to perhaps send, bring up one of the ones you've sent recently and highlight the sections that are about you and highlight the sections that are about the receiver. And the sections that are highlighted that are about the receiver should far outweigh those that are about you. Um,
That's such a great point there. So pull up an
yeah,
old historic email you may have sent out and get the marker pen out, right?
yeah, absolutely. And do it for future ones you send as well. So, for instance, the cold emails that I have sent in the past and that I'm sending now, um, we so we're moving on to point two now, which is about providing value in the content of your email, which we try and do. And a lot of people will opt for sending bulk cold email out, and for me, I'm not a fan of that. I like to do my research about who I'm sending it to
Let's
because
just go
I
back a step, Jamie, just a second. So just
yeah.
define what you mean by bulk cold email.
So people will either be scraping or buying data and then sending the same email out to the whole list. You know,
Okay.
I have done stuff like that before, very early on in my sales career. I remember actually getting hate mail because of it as well in return and making no sales. And it's awful practice.
So it doesn't work. I think that's what you're saying. It
It
doesn't work. So you go to, I don't know, one of the reputable or whatever organizations that are out there, that you go and buy a database. And I think what you're saying is that's probably not the best possible approach when it comes to trying to get engagement.
No, exactly. I mean, you can buy the data and use it in certain ways. If
Sure.
you're prospecting or researching, sure. But then just buying the data and contacting them, with a blanket email, it just doesn't work. And it probably, not only will it not work, it will have a negative effect on your reputation and your kind of sender reputation as an in your for your domain, and it will affect the deliverability of your future emails. So there are so many reasons why it's such a wrong thing to do.
So you're the third person in the last 2 weeks that said that to me. So
Yeah,
the lady I was talking about earlier, the American SDR, said exactly the same thing. She said, "End your subscriptions with these guys. Don't do that." So that's two people that have mentioned it. And I interviewed a couple of episodes ago, I think episode 54, Charlie Gretton, who works in sales, but he works in the data protection GDPR industry.
yeah,
And whilst he didn't give an opinion either way, whether it was good or bad, what he did say was quite a lot of these organisations have got lists where the data is corrupt because people have not given consent to be on there. In fact, have been asked to be removed from that list, and yet they're still on the list. And so it comes back to your point, and it was a point that Charlie made, which is by doing that, by reaching out to those people with those large volume block emails, is actually you're doing yourself more damage because your reputation now starts to suck. right?
Absolutely. And if you you know you might outreach them one to one, even, but even then, it's not worth the money it costs to do it, and the damage to your reputation. So, um, yeah, for me, if I was to say, well, I don't like to tell people you shouldn't do it this way without giving the an alternative. So the much better way to do it for me is to do your own prospecting and to build your own list,
Yeah,
and to research the people that are on that list and the problems that they might be having very specifically.
yeah,
So if I could give a tangible example of how that would work,
mm,
so we work with e-commerce brands and we help them with their email marketing, and we boost email attributed revenue. That's what we do for them. There are lots of ways in which we can help them. So before I reach out to them, I will have a look on their site. I'll have a look at their pop-ups for email opt-in. I'll have a look at their checkout process. I'll sign up to their emails, have a look at their welcome email. I'll try and trigger an abandoned cart automation. Then I have all of this stuff that I can have a look at and say, well, I can see straight away some improvements having spent 5 minutes researching. And then in my outreach, I say, I noticed this. For instance, maybe your pop-up isn't working on your desktop site. You should fix that, because you're missing out on a lot of traffic, a lot of email signups. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing something to the table. I'm bringing some value
got
and
it,
not expecting anything in return.
got it. You're actually providing them with something they should know themselves, and for whatever reason they probably don't.
Yeah,
And actually, what you're doing as well, Jamie, is you're effectively triggering your first point, which is how do you be different? Well, I suspect not many organisations are taking that same approach, which is what I think I heard there was you've almost done a bit of a mini audit, right? And
yeah,
here's a
exactly.
few red flags I've found, and I'm just going to give them to you. Up to you what you want to do with them. But yeah, I love that. Brilliant.
Yeah, and it works as well, right? We do it for our agency and build our pipeline, and I think it's that if I was to point out a problem with that approach, it's that it takes time, but
Mm,
in my opinion, that time is worth investing because it's a privilege. We view it a privilege to be in people's inboxes,
yeah,
especially if they've given you permission to email them regularly with marketing emails, and so that you bear the responsibility of providing something valuable there. Especially if you want them to engage with your emails. So providing value and not expecting anything in return is a great way of building trust, demonstrating expertise, and building relationships.
got it.
And if I think back to when I was first dating my wife, you know, that's how you build relationships,
Yeah,
right? You bring something to the table. You offer value. You provide something without expecting anything in return. And
yeah.
a marriage, in a lot of ways, is very different to a business relationship, but in a lot of ways, it's also quite similar, I think.
Mate, there's a dark conversation that we don't need to be having on this pod for fear of probably getting that wrong, and both because we're both married, getting
Yeah,
ourselves in a lot of trouble. Um,
exactly.
but no, but you make a very good, eloquent point in that example. So offering value, right? And we hear the word offer value around a lot, and sometimes I get quite challenged with it. But it absolutely is the right thing to do. So educate me if you would, Jamie, because well, let me use my son as the example. So he's recently come into the sales industry. He works for an organisation that effectively, I call them Team FeePay. They're a football club, grassroots football club organisation, and they provide a software, a platform, a bit like a website, but with lots more whistles and bells on it that allows grassroots football clubs, busy parents who've got a day job and are doing this, for free, just makes their life easier by automating, collecting players' subs and doing fundraising and all that kind of great stuff. And so he's on that journey at the moment where he's obviously reaching out to his contacts within the football industry that he knows, but he's also having to grow his own list and do that research. When he gets into the email campaigns, is there a sort of a right or a wrong number of emails that you should send to someone? So let's just pretend he's trying to approach the chairman of a local football club, and he's going to do that predominantly through email, but also try other ways like phone and WhatsApp. But is
Hmm.
there a right and a wrong quantity of emails that you should put together when you're trying to engage?
I don't think so. I don't think there is a right or a wrong. What I would say is, although we talk a lot about email marketing as an agency, but and certainly I do, harnessing a multi-channel approach is key. because people say, you might know this better than me, Matt, but how many touch points does it take to make a customer? 6, 7, or 8, isn't it? I think.
Yeah,
You know,
something like that.
yeah. So and that doesn't all have to be on email. 2 or 3 of those could be on email. So I don't think there is a right or a wrong.
Okay.
And from my perspective, there is a time to move away from email. And I think the reason why I learned to get so good at cold emailing is because I could not live with myself doing cold calling. I absolutely hate it. And I've made a successful sales career of not doing it. But, maybe I would be better off if I did. But for me, I could never bring myself to do it. And I remember reading a book, which I don't necessarily think is a good book, but it's called Cold Calling for Chickens, which um, I I thought it would help me, learn how to get comfortable with cold calling.
Right.
And I remember one tip in there being, before you make the cold call, take yourself to the office bathroom, curl up in a ball on the floor, and start pretending to cry. Because then when you get up, nothing's as bad as pretending to be like that. So I remember even doing that once and going to and I just felt awful. I was like, well, that didn't work. And now I just feel, awful. So for me, I got good at cold emailing because I didn't want to do the cold calling. And, Matt, you're
Yeah.
a sales trainer, and you will probably hate for me for saying this on your podcast, but you have to, sell in the way that
You got to be
you feel
yourself.
comfortable with. Yeah,
You've
exactly.
got to be
And
yourself. 100% agree with that. And
yeah,
look, cold
but
calling is listen. First of all, cold calling is predominantly a failure-based approach to reaching out to people, and I make that point simply on the statistics that suggest that you're going to get more no's than yeses. You're probably
yeah,
not going to get many pickups, and you're probably not going to get the opportunity to have too many conversations. So, by its very nature, statistically, it's always going to be very, very difficult to do that. And then the second thing around cold calling is it's not for everybody. And you make the point brilliantly, and I make the point when I'm working with all of my clients. There is no right or wrong way. The way that works is the way that works best for you. And it's a lot easier for you to turn up each day and be yourself with a kind of winning formula that works within yourself than try to be an imposter where you put on this kind of mask and pretend to be someone that you're not. Because it's very, very difficult to keep that con going. Whereas if you turn up and
yeah.
be yourself, and you've got the ability to have some kind of framework that allows you to exploit and leverage that, you don't have to worry about remembering what that looks like because that's just you.
Absolutely, and I think I have a sales career that spans perhaps 13 years, and I could probably count the amount of cold calls I've done on one hand. So we're going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I would say that there is a time to move off of email. If we were to go back, and I think as soon as someone's shown a bit of interest
Yeah.
for me, I will then pick up the phone because it's warmed up and I feel comfortable. And
Okay.
there's a very powerful way of also being frame breaking because these days people aren't picking up the phone.
Okay.
And my in terms of picking up the phone to make calls, and my feeling is that that will only become more prominent is that people will shy away from using the phone in all walks of life, and particularly in the workplace. So 2 emails, if you get a reply and someone's fairly interested, pick up the call because for me it's all about how soon can you build a relationship with that person. How soon
Agreed.
can you get them in front of them face to face and get that kind of you know a lot of it is based people. The whole thing of people by people is about building that relationship and showing them that you're someone that can be trusted and that has a bit some expertise in the field, and ultimately that you've got something that you can offer them that is going to help them, right?
100%. And just circling back really briefly, you and I would both agree, and you just basically alluded to it in that last point, Jamie, which is the phone works brilliantly when you get the opportunity to have a conversation. And having a conversation means there's got to be two parties that are willing to do something. There needs to be. I remember Scott Russell, who was on the podcast, once said sales is about a combination of the willing, or something like that, which was a brilliant point. If you want to use the phone brilliantly, make sure that the person wants to have a conversation with you. Then there's no better vehicle at all for having that than speaking down a phone. But you're right. The whole point of this episode is how do I earn the right? How do I get myself to a position using an email to be able to find myself in a place where I can come off email and have a face to face or a phone conversation. Just before we come off that point about quantity, so you mentioned one or two. So there's no hard and fast rules by the sounds of things, because I've certainly have used in the past almost like a 5 email campaign where sort of emails 1, 2, and 3 is all about that second point you said about offering value. So there's no ask in there. The
Yeah.
fourth one is the ask email, and the fifth one is the goodbye. Is that
Mm.
still a thing? Does that stuff still work?
Yeah, I don't. I think for me, if I'm thinking about what we do have done for clients and what we do for ourselves, it probably gets to around 4 or 5, right?
Yeah,
And I think it's less, I guess, about the quantity of emails you're sending, but what you're trying to get, what kind of response you're trying to elicit. And sometimes people put these, you can call them nurture sequences if you like, together where they're afraid to get a no, you know, and then they craft their emails in a way that because they're afraid of getting a no. For me, a no is valuable because it means you can move
mm,
on, right?
yeah,
So
100%.
they're afraid of getting that no, so that they create these nurture sequences in such a way that um, they're trying to get the yes. Um, and for me, it's, I guess, a less about the quantity and more about what you're putting in the emails. I've had nurture sequences where email number 3 is just an emoji and nothing else.
Right.
And for me, that doesn't, it's frame breaking, sure, but it doesn't necessarily serve a purpose or offer any value. So I would much rather someone says, look, if you don't want this, just email me, reply to me and say no.
Yeah.
Don't say anything else, just reply and say no. And then I can
Yeah.
move on and spend my time elsewhere.
Is there a requirement really to, let me rephrase the question. Let's go
Mm,
back to point number one, which is stand out, be different.
yeah,
Are you being different, therefore, if you're going for a no rather than a yes?
I'd say so.
Yeah. And so,
I
therefore, the tone of the emails that you're sending out on behalf of clients or people listening to this should, maybe one thing to consider is to craft your content within your email, which is more about trying to disqualify somebody else out rather than get them to come back to you and give you what you want, which is a permission to proceed or a yes.
Yeah, and I think coming from that position is hard
Yeah.
to teach people, but the confidence that portrays can't be manufactured, I think. So for me, it's, if I'm coming from a position where, look, I know that we do great stuff for our clients. I've recognized maybe there's some opportunities because I've seen that your pop up doesn't work on your desktop site or whatever the value piece is.
Yeah.
Um, I'd like to have a conversation about that. If I can grab half an hour of your time, let's just chat about it. And if it might be that we can't and there is no value, but I want to find out. And the least you'll get is half an hour of time well spent where you can go away with some tips on how to improve your email marketing. So,
Very
and
good.
then further on, it's like, well, okay, if you try and get that no, or you're pre-qualifying, right, before you waste your time on calls, because that's what, when I hear about people using lead gen agencies where they promise so many meetings a month, is the qualifying stage there, right, and they
Yeah.
end up wasting so much time on sales calls where it's just not been qualified at all, and sometimes people turn up not realizing they're on a sales or a demo call. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that process of qualifying is really important.
Really good. I must just mention, I had a conversation working with a client recently. We were talking about outbound, and the most memorable outbound email campaign that I received was probably about 2 years ago. I can't remember who they were or what they were representing, so it was a while back. But I do remember is the email, Jamie, and the email started like this. I can't remember what the title was, but I opened it, so it was obviously an engaging one. And
Yeah,
the very first line was, "Hi Matt, straight to the point. This is a sales email, right?"
yeah,
And I actually valued that because being in the industry, two things. Number one, I'm really curious to anybody who works in the same industry as me. What can I learn from them? What are they doing differently that works that maybe I could do myself? So I'm always interested to see how people show up. Mate, if someone cold calls me, they hang up on me because I ask them questions about where they've learned to do that, and it's bizarre. It's quite sad to some extent.
yeah,
But the opening line was, "Hi Matt, straight to the point. This is a sales email. However, I'm not going to sell you anything on this email. You'll have to wait for the next one. The next one's going to arrive in 3 days' time. See ya. And that was the end
Yeah.
of the email, right?
Mm.
Immediately I'm going, whoa, that's different. But there wasn't so much value in there other than the fact that she'd it was from a lady, absolutely smashed my curiosity button to pieces. And so
Yeah.
now I'm looking out for the next one. Does that feel like the sort of thing that might be useful? It's
Yeah. I mean, talk about being different. Yeah, for me, that's one way of doing it. I think the value piece, it might not come straight away, but I'm hoping that she followed up with some value later on. But for me, it's yeah, talk about attention, talk about grabbing curiosity and intrigue. That does all of those things. So
yeah, interesting.
maybe you'll have to introduce me to whoever this was, so I can have a chat with them.
desperately trying to find the email somewhere, but
Yeah.
just on that point, yeah. So email 2 arrived 3 days later, which was I'm back. Told you I would be, and I just thought, so refreshing. And
Mhm.
she showed up on time. And then she did hit me with she hit me with the disqualification. So this is probably not for you, but there are two things that we see in the industry that you work in that are really causing people like you sleepless nights. And then she gave me the two things,
Mm.
and she said, obviously, I'm going to try and sell you something. That's going to happen on the next email. Look out for that. Be there in 3 days' time. 3 days' time comes. So I'm looking out for the email. How bizarre is this?
Yeah.
And the email says, hi, Matt, here's the Hail Mary. And they were the words she used. And she said, I want to get on your calendar for 30 minutes of your time to find out if those two problems are causing you sleepless nights. What does next week look like?
Mm.
It was just a genius way of doing things. Jamie, let's move on to number 3, which in a funny kind of way, we may have segued in with that last bit, which is talk to people. What does that mean?
Yeah. So I'm not going to pretend like I came up with this saying because I saw someone say it on LinkedIn, but you know, what they said was that everyone uses email to talk except marketers. And for me, that kind of I wish I'd come up with that and that we'd copyrighted it and used it as our slogan because it's so true. And I think what point three is that you should talk to people when you're emailing them. And that sounds really obvious, but you know, any copy that we write for emailing, whether it's for newsletters or for e-commerce or whatever it is, we are writing it how we talk, or we're writing how our clients are talking. And for me, it's so powerful because being conversational, just like that lady was in the example you gave, is so much more engaging. And it's especially in this world now where we have AI, which is a tangent we don't need to go down today, Matt, for sure. But
That's like,
um,
it's like marriage, mate.
yeah, exactly. We could do the next one could be AI and marriage. So no, especially in today's world where copy is can be so cheaply made by AI tools. Now, being conversational and authentic is probably going to be more important than ever.
Yeah.
Um, so actually talking to people in the emails for me is really important.
How do you do that though? I mean, it's like the simplest thing in the world, right? Just write as you talk. Is that how you do it?
I think there's comparisons here to when I don't know, Matt, if this is a bit before your time maybe, but when you're you on the dating apps and you match with someone and you've got to type something, right? You're typing the opening line,
Just
and
if
there's so
my
much.
wife's listening, I've never been on a dating app ever.
Yeah. There's so much thought that goes behind that first line, too much thought, and in the end it's just better to just speak to them, just to have a conversation. And
Mm.
so if I was to draw the comparison to email, it's you got to be clever and creative, but also just talk to people, because and that could just be um hi, so and so, how's it going, and just being conversational as the opener.
Yeah.
There are different ways of doing it, and I would always push people to be creative. But I think in the end, if you're hitting the past 2 points that I brought up, is to offer value and to actually just converse with people.
Yeah.
Um, a great road to go down. And we
We don't have
even
to. It
when
doesn't
we
have to be any more complicated than that, really, does it?
no, it doesn't. And it's if you met if I always like to think that when I'm writing any email, like I said, if it's e-commerce, newsletter, or cold outreach, I'm writing it as if they're in front of me and I'm talking to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not just broadcasting what you have to say at them. You're trying to elicit some kind of response. You're trying to be engaging and show some personality is probably one thing that I didn't mention there. we talk about building relationships, and sales is a lot about building relationships, and that happens by being authentic and conversational.
How do you bring personality to an email? Is it just literally the way that you write? I guess that must be the answer, right? It's the way that you read an email from someone tells you a lot about their personality. True.
Yeah, right. And I think it's this is where you join the previous 2 points of being conversational and being creative. It's easy for me to sit on a podcast, Matt, and say how you should write emails because I'm a copywriter. There
Mm.
are a lot of people that aren't gifted in that way, and I say it sounds like I'm being big headed there by saying gifted, but I'll also admit that I'm really shit at a lot of things as well, right? So it's I am confident about what we can do really well.
Mate, I'm going to endorse you for gifted because obviously we're connected on LinkedIn, and the reason you're on the podcast is you do write brilliantly, and that's what
Thank
creates
you.
the engagement, and that's why we're having this conversation.
Yeah, appreciate that. And there are a lot of people that are stronger in other areas, and copywriting isn't one of them. But everyone has friends that they talk to, have been in a position where they've made new friends or have dated and it's gone well. And people, don't talk about, oh, I need to be a great salesman to write a great email or a great marketer. You just need to be, this is going to sound cheesy, but kind of be yourself and be authentic and have the goal in mind that you're trying to strike up a relationship and provide some value and,
Yeah.
talk how you would talk normally. And it's another qualifier, right? Because one thing I've been guilty of is taking deals that I shouldn't have taken
Mm.
because the client was bad for me
Mm. Oh,
or the
100%.
company, or the personalities weren't a good fit, right? So if they get turned off by the way you talk, that's a pre-qualifying element, and you shouldn't be scared of turning people off with the way you talk because you want to get the people that like the way that you talk, and that's how we get our clients for the Inbox Club. They see the way we write, the way we engage with people on LinkedIn, on our newsletter, on our website, and they think, oh, I like the way these guys talk, and I want them to write for me.
Amen to that. I want to move in a little while on to what happens after email engagement has taken place and how you nurture and how you keep a list warm and all
Yeah,
those great things. We'll talk about that in a second. But before we do, important, I guess, just have a little conversation around measurement and data because I would imagine there'll be a lot of people who are listening here who just email people and they don't really know what happens next. And so there's probably quite a lot of insight required to know, well, what is an open rate and what I mean, is there a sort of a standard open rate number that people should be striving to hit? What are some of the measurement tools that are out there?
yeah, it's really different depending on what you're doing. Cold outreach, the metrics will always be so poor compared to newsletter campaigns and e-commerce. Um, if you compare them, but in terms of open rates, you want to be aiming, in my opinion, for about 20%
Yeah,
if you're doing cold outreach, and over 40. And I'm talking about these in terms of minimum. Um, Open rates, they tell you some things, but they don't give you the full story. So any kind of analytics we do, or when we're looking at metrics, we always take them in conjunction. Sorry if you heard my computer there.
it's
We
okay.
take them in conjunction with other metrics, and the other one that we use is click rate, and how click rate and open rate can be analyzed as a ratio. You then get the click through rate, which is clicks per open, right? So or clicks as a ratio of the open rate. So for us, true engagement happens in the clicks.
Right.
Um, and one metric that isn't talked about enough, which is because it's harder to track, is replies and forwards. Um, you know, replies sounds obvious when you're doing cold outreach, but not for newsletters. How often are people that are sending newsletters are encouraging people to reply to them? Not very many, but that's how a conversation happens, and a newsletter should be a conversation. So, in my opinion,
That's
so
already that's already just smacked me between the eyes because until you said that, I just assumed it was a one-way street where you're just pumping out information.
yeah, it shouldn't be, and we
Right.
actively encourage people to reply. When I talked there about how you open it and show personality in your email, I say, hey Jamie, how's it going? And we've experimented before by saying, I meant that question. Let me know how it's going. Reply to this email,
Right.
and then getting into the body of the email. And that's a newsletter, right? That's not a cold campaign. So
Mm,
it also does wonders for your deliverability score as
yeah.
well. If you're getting replies and people are engaging that way, and then enhancing the people forwarding your emails and getting new signups that way as well, is another great metric that I think should be talked about more.
That so I want to talk a bit about newsletters in a minute. It's something I've been thinking about doing myself. But
Yeah,
uh, before we go to newsletter, what about call to action? Because I would obviously it's pointless sending an email out to someone unless you want something to happen, right?
yeah,
So call to action is a really critical part.
yeah. It's where you get your clicks. So it's where your clicks are reported, and I would 2 points on CTAs or calls to action. One, be really specific about what you want people to do, and by being more specific, you take friction out of the process. So if you want them to um, buy something, tell them what it is that you want them to buy and how much it's going to cost and how long before they receive it. The more specific you can be, the better quality clicks you'll get in the engagement. If you want them to book a call with you, the CTA should be, click this button, it will take you to my Calendly, and you can book a 30-minute slot. So the more specific you are, the better the quality of the clicks you get.
Does it also mean as well that you should tell them what's going to happen when they get on the call, or is that not that relevant? I think what I mean by that is, click the link below. You'll take you to my Calendly page, give you some options on dates to pick for a 30-minute call.
Yeah.
And then when we get on the call, the following things are going to happen. Does it help to also sort of be a bit transparent about what's going to happen next?
Oh yeah, for sure. And you see a lot of email marketers, what they do is they build these CTA blocks, right? So it's not just a button. There's some copy that's the pre CTA copy. There's some copy that's the post CTA copy, and so the CTA becomes this block where you're telling them what you want them to do, what they can expect when they click the button, and then if they're booking the meeting or if they're buying something, what they could expect. It will be delivered in 2 days, or in the meeting we'll talk about these two things. But yeah, that's really important. And the other thing when it comes to calls to action, because I promised two things there.
Yeah.
The second thing is that you should stick to one CTA per campaign. And so if you want to ask someone to do something, only ask them to do that one thing in that campaign. You can repeat the button or the call to action throughout the email, but make sure you're only asking them to take one action.
Right. And the
Um,
reason behind that
is because if you're asking people to do too many things at once, they end up doing nothing quite
yeah,
often.
yeah.
So it will inspire better action if you ask them to do only one thing.
So that's that paralysis by analysis kind of thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Epic. So let's just talk about newsletters in the time that we've got left, because so I have a Facebook group. It's 100 people in it. That's all, and I post pretty much every day something to do with sales. Right. It's a one-way conversation in most cases. Very few people engage with me, so obviously I don't need to know why, but I'm obviously not doing something quite as well as I should have done. Glad you came on, because I've already written down 2 or 3 things that I can do to try and improve that. But
Nice.
what would be the advantage in me moving some of those guys and girls that have opted in and want to be part of that group into a newsletter? Why would someone want to start a newsletter?
I mean, I could talk to you all day about why someone should start a newsletter.
Give me 1 or 2 reasons why someone would
Yeah.
want to.
So sales at the moment seem to be, it's particularly in our industry as a marketing agency, sales are taking longer to get over the line. I think there's more buyer hesitancy. And so when you asked me earlier about how many emails you should send before, what's the right quantity of emails to send in a cold outreach campaign or nurture sequence, for me, it's if you can get them on your newsletter sign up, that question doesn't matter because you can send
Yeah,
them newsletter until they choose to unsubscribe.
sure.
So it's how do you move them from cold person, a stranger, into your ecosystem where they're then getting newsletter campaigns. And for me, a newsletter can do a number of things. It builds familiarity, so you're not a stranger anymore.
Yeah,
It builds authority, trust, and expertise because you're giving them value, you're giving them insights and tips into your area of expertise. you're putting in case studies and testimonials to show how trustworthy you are and the results that you've gotten from other people. And it's a great way of building relationships. So taking it beyond familiarity, but including things in there. I write our newsletter from the Inbox Club, and I put stories in there from my life. I things that I've learned throughout my life. Whether it's on holiday or in my marriage or at home or whatever it is, it builds a relationship with the reader.
Yeah.
And by being conversational the way you write, it's for me, it's inboxes are so personal.
Yeah.
It's direct, and so it should be conversational. So newsletters for me are a great way to nurture over a long period of time until someone is ready to buy, or they know someone that is ready to buy. You know,
Yeah.
so yeah, newsletters, even if it's just a monthly one to start off with, I would say weekly is the sweet spot.
Is it? That's not overkill?
No, not weekly. Yeah, I think weekly. We do ours weekly.
Okay.
It performs excellently, and I think if you're writing good emails, and I would encourage anyone to get in touch with me, and I will spend half an hour with them,
Can
brainstorming.
I'm going to put in the show notes the link to your newsletter then, if that's okay with
Yeah,
you, and then because people can then see the style. So put your money where your mouth is, kind of thing. This is how Jamie writes for the Inbox Club. That's obviously a winning formula. Then
yeah,
other than using your services to do it for them, which I guess is one of the key things of the business that you offer, but they can
sure.
start to see what a good formula looks like. Because one of the questions I was going to ask off the back of that, so if you start a newsletter up, is there a bit like 4-4-2 or 3-5-1 in football? Is there a sort of a tactic that works best in terms of flow or content or quantity?
I would say the ideal quantity or the ideal send frequency is whatever you can manage to make sure you can do it consistently.
Yeah, because that's the hard thing with newsletters, isn't it? It's okay starting one, but you try keeping it going.
Exactly. So tasking yourself with writing a weekly newsletter might be too much for you right now, so do it monthly. The important thing is that you deliver what you said you were going to deliver when they
Yeah,
signed up, and you do it consistently.
yeah,
So whatever that means for you, do it consistently. That might mean you do a quarterly one.
yeah,
I would challenge anyone that says that they'll do a quarterly, but if that's what it takes to get started, then do that. My co-founder built a newsletter business, or is still building a newsletter business on the side, and it's a fantasy football newsletter called Lazy FPL. And that newsletter goes out 3 times a week
that's it.
to people that want tips on fantasy football. And so I think what I wanted to demonstrate there is that if you have the right subject area and you have the right audience, there's almost no such thing as too frequent.
Yeah,
But that's a balancing act, right? And that's something that deserves a bit more thought than listening to some guy waffle on a podcast about it.
it's great waffle. It's great waffle.
Thanks.
But just I'm putting it out there. But you offer that service for people. So if I wanted to have a newsletter and I said, Jamie, I need to outsource this, that's a service that you provide, right?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah. So
cool.
we if I can do a short plug, we write newsletters for people. And the way that works is we onboard people for an hour. We get to talk to them about their businesses, their competitors, their customers, their audience, um, who they're trying to target, the goals they're trying to achieve, and their tone of voice. And once they're onboarded, we'll have a half an hour meeting once a month if they want a monthly newsletter.
Yeah.
We hash out some content ideas. We go away and write it and send it for them. So that's how it works. But it's something that we just love doing. So to get the opportunity to do it for people is a privilege. The bonus is that we get to make some money out of it as well. And that's where we've managed to align something that we're incredibly passionate about. And being able to do it for a living, which is amazing.
Look, we need to think about wrapping things up. But before I do, I'm going to hope you don't mind. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you for three practical takeaways on those three topics. Um,
Yeah,
but before we do that, so let's just give everybody the information. So you're on LinkedIn, right? Obviously, so they can go and connect with you over there.
they can. LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. I'm embarrassed to say, but yeah. So get me on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
Yeah, do that, and if you
it's
want to have a chat about it,
Jamie Woodbridge,
Jamie
um,
Woodbridge. Yeah,
and the Inbox Club is the company. And what's the email? Sorry, the website address for that?
The website address is theinbox.club. So www.theinbox.club.
And I'll put the link to your newsletter sign up in the show notes as well. So if people want to go and see how it's done brilliantly, then there they can
Awesome.
go. I've got one final question to ask you, but first of all, I'm just going to wrap up. Jamie, it's been an awesome conversation. I've learnt loads. I always want to give the listeners as much practical help as possible. If I said to you, can you think or can you give me one practical thing that someone can do right after this podcast is finished to stand out by being different with the way that they engage online? What one thing could they do today to be different?
Research who you're contacting, I think, is an answer that's probably not that satisfying for the listener, but knowing who you're contacting, and we talked about that, about the privilege of being in someone's inbox. That doesn't mean you should be apologetic or put them on a pedestal. You still need to be confident about the value you can provide them in such, but not in an arrogant way. So, really research who it is you're contacting and what it is you can do to help them, and make sure that comes through in the email. If you wanted a practical step about what you could do right now, just craft a cold email and send it to me if you like, and I'll tell you how good it is, or how bad it is maybe. But focus on doing something slightly different. And if you want to practice on me, do it, and I'll tell you that actually this is too cute, this is too creative. You know, think about this, or I consider me a safe space, or maybe one of your friends, but really practice crafting an email that's like, okay, well, if I throw everything I know about, or the think I know about cold emailing out of the window right now, and I start from scratch, how do I want to approach this? Imagine you're opening your bedroom window and you're shouting your sales message to someone who's walking by. How would you get their attention? How would you generate enough intrigue and curiosity that person walking past on the street is happy to come in for a cup of tea and talk about it a bit further? That's probably a
Brilliant.
bit of a creepy analogy, and I didn't
No, it's
practice
great.
that. So,
It's
but
great.
it's if you're thinking about it in those terms, in terms of real people that you're talking to, and how you would talk to people in real life, that's how you should build your email.
And that's how you're different, because most people are doing it the other way, which is all about them and not doing any research and just Hail Marying, right?
Exactly. And if you're putting quick question in your subject line, stop. For the love of God, stop. Do something different.
How about the third email, thoughts question mark? Let's not go
Yeah,
there.
and all that one. Yeah, please. Yeah, do
Stop it.
something different. Be interesting.
Brilliant. Practical takeaway. Can you think of just one thing that the listener could perhaps do, or think about doing, or learn more about to offer value?
Yeah, again, this comes back to researching and knowing who you're contacting, and find a very tangible way in which you can help them, and then do it for free in that email. You
Brilliant.
know, that's yeah. If I was going to stop there, that's what I would do.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And then the last one, what practical things can people do to talk to people in their email?
Imagine the receiver is in front of you and you're talking to them. That's the simplest way. And don't worry about being too formal or writing like you're. So many people write like they're a company. You should write like you're a person. So imagine you're talking to that person, and just write like that. And people won't pull you up on that. It's a great way to write, and it's an engaging way to write.
It's like you go to the pub and I meet you, Jamie, at the pub. Say, hi, Jamie. Hope you're well. How's your year going so far?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
probably not
I
going to
hope
happen
that
in the pub, right?
Yeah, I hope this email finds you well. That people don't talk like that. So talk how you would talk normally, because otherwise it will get identified as a sales email and just turn people off.
Yeah, brilliant. Wonderful. Last question, Jamie. A wise man once taught me that a belief is something that we accept as true and real. There's a number of ways in which we create beliefs. And one of those ways is something happens to us in our life, which is an emotionally charged experience. And that constructs our belief about that thing that happened. So, for argument's sake, I can remember when I was a 14-year-old kid, I went potholing on this adventure holiday with a bunch of other students and got stuck down this pothole thing. And ever since then, of course, I've developed this belief of small, closed places and claustrophobia. I think I'm coming
Yeah,
out of it, but it takes a lot for me to get on the tube in London in rush hour.
yeah,
So there's an example of how something that happened to me in my past, created an emotion based off an emotional experience, has created a belief about myself. I'm just curious to know if there was one thing in your past, and let's try if we can to keep it to the world of sales, perhaps, or content marketing. The question is this: can you think of anything that happened in your past, in your career, that you thought that if you had the chance to go back and do it differently, you would do it differently the next time around? And if you can think of that thing, what was it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's. I remember reading this in your book, Sales Glue, where you talk about things that impact your emotions and then your behavior and the
Mm,
outcome. Um, so yeah, there are a few. To be fair, if I was to point one out, which happened in my sales career, is that I was dishonest with a customer, and I knew that I had bad news for them, but I tailed them along and kept that bad news from them until it got to a situation where um, it culminated in this horrible scenario. And I remember the phone call. I remember the way my body felt during that phone call whilst the customer was really angry with me, and the customer didn't even shout at me or anything. It was just silence. And I remember sitting there and squirming, and it was the most horrible thing. And so from that point on, I always promised myself that I would always be honest with any customer in all of my business dealings. That I would just be upfront, and that really helped me um, um, learn how to deliver bad news about things and how to keep a business relationship going if when things are going wrong. That probably
brilliant.
doesn't tie very well into what we've been talking about
No, it
today,
does.
but
It
um,
does, because what it basically says, I think what it says. Well, I know what it says. It's uh, don't be that person again, and you learn from that experience, and now you are just. I've heard it right the way through the podcast. You just be yourself and be honest. Honesty works.
yeah,
Um,
and I appreciate that's not a very satisfying headline because everyone's heard it before, but I think there's still a lot of people are guilty of not being authentic and not being honest or being, and that's how business is done. Business, how do you think the most successful people get where they are? It's because of usually who they know and the relationships that they have. It's very rare that it happens any other way. So, um, and that customer that I pissed off by being dishonest ended up actually employing me later down the line. So he can't have been that pissed off, but um, but that for me, that was a very memorable part. And sometimes I think about that when I lay in bed and I get all hot in my face because I'm still embarrassed by it. But
Brilliant,
yeah, that's definitely something that I took to heart.
great feedback. Love it. Jamie Woodbridge, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I've really enjoyed this last hour.
It's been great. Thanks for having. It's been again. We talk about privilege a lot, but it's been a privilege to be on here. So thank you, Matt.
That's it, folks. Another episode of the Sales Cadence podcast dispatched and delivered. If you're in the business of converting leads into cash and you're finding some challenge with that, i.e., you're not getting the conversion rates that you're expecting, or it's taking too long to get a conversation to a conclusion and then ultimately a sale, then Leads to Sales can help with that. It's an online course. It's me and you and 2 or 3 others. It's a very small group. I try and keep restricted to no more than 6 people because I want to get people involved, hear their challenges and solve their problems on the training. This is not just a turn up and listen to a bunch of slides. But if you can find some space and you want to get involved, you'll find details on the website, salescadence.co.uk. You'll find it, I think, on the training page. Folks, thanks ever so much for tuning in and listening. Remember the mantra, everybody's in sales, we're all selling something. Whatever it is that you're selling, I wish you the best of luck, and I really look forward to seeing you on the next episode. See you soon.